Now, to succeed in pop quiz questions for this topic, um, we need to break it down into a few things. We need to kind of at least to the bare minimum know all the different or not all the different, all the important different approaches that exist for data persistence, and then for each approach, the basic use cases where they're commonly used in iOS development, how it works, in terms of um, um, memory caching, decoding, that type of, even thread sometimes. Um, but then how the data is stored is kind of a broad topic. You don't need to know everything about everything, but at least the bare minimum. One is stored in the file, one is stored in your sandbox, something is stored in encrypted, something is stored in SQLite, that type of stuff. And then the most important thing, the limitations of it, the pros and cons of each approach will help you immensely while making decisions what to use at what part while answering the system design questions. Um, so this is how we're going to approach this. And if we know these, uh, you'll surely succeed at least in the pop quiz data persistent question, and then we'll tackle the system design too as well. So let's kind of really get into the pop quiz style question, right, for data persistence. We'll look at some of the examples, and I'll highly encourage you guys have been really good at just interacting, and we'll try to keep that energy going. So let's see. So what I just did here was I kind of laid out some of these points of what I think are different ways data can be persisted, and not necessarily persistence as in offline and off memory, but just in general, like how a data is stored and then used in the future. What do you think are some of the good ways out of these for data persistence? How would you kind of go about that? Like what are some of the good ones here?
So is your question is based on in-memory data persistence as well?
Yeah, just in general, right? So I think you answered it. You asked me a good question, like why, like what do you mean by good, right? Essentially that's what you're trying to understand. What's a good method? Which of the one is a good strategy? How do I answer that? So again, like depends on what you're trying to do. So just based on that, let's see. If I want to, um, which one would I use, or which ones will I use if I wanted to persist data and retain the session state until the app is closed? So that means I don't want it to persist after the app is closed.
Yeah, the
And
instance variable can be one of them.
okay, that's
A
good.
static class can be one of it.
Yep.
And then what I see here, I think, yeah, those two are the only thing I can see, like will not retain data after the app is terminated.
Okay.
Well, a singleton, right? Usually don't singletons usually, like, there's one instance of the class that you could say that, and I guess it depends what singleton it is, right? But
yeah, you're absolutely right. I think singletons are conceptually a good way to kind of hold data during the retain data during this session cycle.
It holds to a state. Yeah,
exactly. So these are some of the ones that are kind of focused on purely, while the app is running, and not once the app is terminated. So dependency injection.
What you meant by caching is like it's a NS cache, something like that.
Yes, NS cache, right? NS cache is one of the ways. And there's some other caching ways as well. But I think underlying caching even for like UI image, it all extends to NS cache. So you're right. Caching is just stored in the RAM, and once you quit the app, it frees up that space.
Can I
Okay,
ask
Uh,
oh,
this caching versus persistent, I'm slightly always confused on that. Like, yeah, in terms of iOS specific caching has a role, but on a broader definition of caching, it's very much there is no difference between a persistent and a caching, right?
um, I think cache is traditionally in computer science. I think it's just always been associated with RAM versus ROM versus the memory. Um, uh, Sorry, memory versus storage rather. Um, so that's how I think Apple just chose to use that, um, the verbiage. So it's slightly different.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, you were about to ask something.
yeah, I I was going to ask. So, if we were in an interview and we were
Yeah,
talking about, my question would be like, if you're building a large scale app, and it kind of goes back to phones being really powerful, right? So let's
right.
say you say I want something to retain until the app is closed, or I want to, or even if you wanted to store data, like if you have data that's shared between like iOS and Android teams, and you're trying to like store data locally, like core data or user defaults or something, you have to, and then you're also having like a cloud kit or something else. Then you would have to like sync those up and make sure that your data is good. Where I'm finding that, like, what are your thoughts on an app just being bigger and having like very little like local persistence, like versus like trying to like store things whenever they're needed. So for example, an app that has a lot of images, like
Yeah,
for example, Bank of America's app is like 400 megabytes, right? Because we just like throw tons of stuff that the user probably never will see, but
right.
you don't really have to like store it locally, and you can like use it more dynamically. You don't have to like worry as much about that. So is that something that you think we would be useful to bring up in an interview with? Because that's my whole thing is like, I haven't used core data in years,
Right.
because like it's just one more thing you'd have to interact with, versus you could just make the app bigger. You could just give a SQL database, and you could just give them all the images up front for the most part that they need, without really needing to store as much. I don't know if that makes sense. Just because that's what I would bring up in an interview, and like just throwing that out there. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a very fair point, right? Like, um, it all kind of comes down to, again, like three things: A, like the use case, and B, really, while selecting, whether using core data or just having a SQL database, or not having having zero persistence, having everything just being sent by the server, and then once the app is closed, you just get rid of all the data. Um, it's it, they're all valid strategies. It purely, again, like depends on the use case. For example, maybe, and I'm not, I can't speak for like Bank of America, but just as a banking app, let's say if I was asked to design a banking app, for me, the interviewer just gives me that question, and I have to keep in mind that, in a banking app, like it's important to worry about data leaks and storage, and so my caching strategy has to really depend upon encryption, instead of using saving things in like user defaults. Maybe I'll use keychains, uh, or maybe where parts where I don't want to save something on the phone, I'll just make it driven by the server. But at the end of the day, I have to let the interviewer know kind of like how I'm making the decisions and why I'm making the decisions. Uh, I'm choosing to not use core data, instead having it be real-time fetch by server, because this could, lead to, I don't know, core data is pretty secure, but could lead to um, some kind of security compliance issue. That's probably not a fair argument, but if I'm able to just verbally kind of communicate what I'm thinking and how I'm thinking, the interviewer will a lot of times give me cues. Oh, we're not worried about the security part of it. We're really focused on, like, let's say, how would you approach it if you only care about a good user experience? Then in that case, maybe you have to kind of think about, oh, I don't want long fetch cycles or server requests where a wheel is spinning and I am and the users just waiting to load a lot of things. Maybe persisting some of the stuff from the previous requests might help. And then what I can choose there depends on, like, the data that I'm choosing to fetch and persist. If core data is an overkill, yeah, a lot of times it is, and you can just go with just writing to files, saving it as it is, and then just kind of like talking about that will help. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think so. So maybe just in an interview setting, like, as we're talking, because there's really no one way to do anything, right? There's always trade-offs.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
So it sounds like that's what you were saying, is just try to understand what they're asking and what parameters they want you to consider when you're trying to decide what's the best strategy to use. Out of all the
right. And a lot of times, with an open-ended, vague question, you have to come up with your own strategies to, at least, like, as a base to build on top of. At that point, the interviewer is really seeing what are the things that you're keeping in mind. Encryption, performance, small data requests, reusing data, that type of stuff. And it all comes down to building on top of that, knowing the use cases, limitations, and the trade-offs, and just verbally communicating why I'm doing this. Almost everything, every time you use in a system design, is a cheat code, right? Like, every time you're selecting anything while talking about your solution, when you're selecting one thing that has several options, you should talk about the trade-offs. Always, like, that will, like, the interviewer at that time is going to be like, okay, this is perfect, this is ideal, that's what I wanted. So that's a good sheet to keep in mind. But when it comes to something like pop quiz, the questions are going to be different. It's not going to be as open-ended. It's going to be, if somebody will ask, you won't ever face a question like, how would you persist data in a banking app? It'll be very specific scenario where, like, I have a collection view or a table view with hundreds of data coming in, hundreds of images coming in. How would I make it user make a good UX? And that's when you have to consider a mix of caching and storage. And if you're not quite sure, you should absolutely ask the interviewer, okay, well, I'll definitely consider caching, but in order for me to really make the decision to use core data or save to file, I just have a question. Why would is the image going to be the same each time? And if the interviewer says no, then you can just rule out storage, because there's no point of storing something that changes in every cycle. But caching would help because it's in one session. So unless the page is refreshed, the data is refreshed, you can always cache it and then clear cache when the new stuff is coming in. So that's the extent of which pop quiz style question will be for this. But let's look at another question here. What would you use if you wanted to retain the network response to optimize performance, right? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think caching or anything that uses that's not writing to disk, as that can take a lot longer than keeping something in memory. So
Yep,
similar to last time,
you got it right. It's just caching.
yeah, just
Because
caching.
a network response is going to be fundamentally um, uh, just different, right? Every time, considering not just the data or the body of the response, but headers and like um, some kind of what are all the different things that are sent along with it. And if you're caching that, you can certainly use it for analytics or just um, for just refreshing the page without getting the same data. But right, you're absolutely right. We don't need to store it in memory. We don't need to decode it. We don't need to write to file or code data anytime, because it's highly likely that if it's an API, if it's a network response, it's going to change at some point. Um, let's see, what else do we have? Where's my cursor? There it is. Oop. What would you use to sync data between app instances on multiple devices? That was a something that Brian, you were talking about, right? If you're an Android app, or like not even Android, if you just have iOS apps on your iPad and iPhone, how would you sync data between them? So what are some of the strategies you guys can think of out of these?
We can use a shared keychain, shared user defaults.
Yeah. Shared user
database is really useful because both can use the same database.
Absolutely right. So you guys kind of understand like the general purpose of a question like this is basically trying to know if a candidate knows what are the ones that can sync data between devices, and with the ones that are purely sandbox to your device, your app. So right, yeah, you're right here. Shared user defaults are great. Core data by itself, maybe not, but I think using with CloudKit is a great way to do data syncing. SQLite, again, using with CloudKit is great for all the devices that are on iCloud. Realm is a third-party solution to data persistence by MongoDB. I'm in particular not familiar with it, and I don't think in any iOS interview you're going to be asked about it. But I just thought of kind of including this in the slide just to highlight that there's other third-party options for these type of problems too. And so let's see what else we have.
Isn't shared keychain also something that we can use across apps built under the same bundle identifiers?
Which one you said? Shared which one?
The keychains, like app which are built with the same bundle identifiers can share the keychains, right?
Yes. Yeah, that is correct. You have the ability to like log in the user of right, like
so you log out from one app, you log out from other apps, or the vice versa, right? You log in from one app, and like Facebook, the app and the Facebook Messenger works the same way.
Right. But is keychain enabled with CloudKit? Probably yes, right? In that case, it can talk to other devices too. But I think keychain by itself fundamentally just pretty much storing like any data in an encrypted format, any preferably small data in a encrypted format. That's like the big thing about keychain. But then yes, like once you add CloudKit dependency to that, it just becomes a whole new thing too. You can work between different devices. But
even if you don't have CloudKit enabled, right? So for a local device, for example,
user
in a local device, it basically shares your credentials across different apps.
Yes,
same organization.
For the same device, correct. I think the the keychain sandboxing environment is based on your bundle identifier correctly. So if you have multiple apps with the which are part of the same app family, then you can do that. But I don't think you can do the same with user defaults.
You can't do it.
And if I'm not mistaken, like core data, it's deleted. If someone deletes the app, then core data stuff is lost. So if you have multiple devices in the same app, to me it seems that you would have to, like, it would, for each app that for each device, it would have to download the data locally to that device. Whereas a keychain could be shared across and not
Right.
have to like download it each time, even though it would be running like the same code to download. So it, in theory, download the data, but it's just more work to use for core data.
Yeah, I think core data by itself will require each app to have its own database, right? But I think with CloudKit you can tie it with multiple devices, and right, like if you delete an entry from in one of the device in your app, it will reflect that. I am almost positive there are kind of layers where you can set those um, you know um, uh, different preferences of how you want core data syncing to work. Again, I don't have a just like a lot of experience with it. Most of the um, apps that I work with, they just don't use core data as much. Um, but and if like you were probably not going to be expected to, like, you might not be asked on a very specific question on that, but something like this, like if you want to sync data between different device, different apps, yeah, like knowing that use case, solutions to that use case is important. um, so let's see, save personally identifiable information when app launches. um, and I feel like Brian would be is a master at this one. uh,
You know what though? Like, yeah, it's just the less you store, and whatever you store, make sure it's encrypted, the better, so that data can't
exactly.
be confidential. Um, and another interesting thing is, like, if you're using, and I guess that does not answer response to your question, but CloudKit, if you
Yeah.
have an Android and an iOS version of an app, then I think that would make CloudKit less good of a solution, because it would be nice for multiple like apps to share a similar cloud database instead of trying. I don't think CloudKit works with Android, but if it does, then I have no idea. But yeah, but like, again, the less whatever you store locally, encrypt it. Whatever
Yeah.
you fetch, encrypt it. Just encrypt everything for
100%. And
information.
you're on the money there. The most important thing here, because it's a personally identifiable information, the important part is the keyword is encryption.
Yeah, and CloudKit's really good. It has a lot of good stuff. I've used it for one personal app I built like 4 years ago, but
wow.
a lot of good stuff out of the box.
Yeah, and I think they're making even more improvements to kind of like tie it down with all these different frameworks now, um, which is great. But yeah, in terms of encryption, there's only two out of the box solutions, right? It's Keychain and CloudKit. And Apple is like, use Keychain and CloudKit for storing privacy, and this is a great use case for that. So this question, even though I included it in the some of these pop quiz style questions, it's a great thing to keep in mind while designing your for system design approach of an app solution. Let's say, for example, if somebody is if an interviewer is really asking specifically around authentication, logging in, signing up, um, um, it's great to keep in mind that user tokens, um, passwords. I mean, you shouldn't say password, but even like personal information, like maybe birth date, if the app requires, I don't know. Those should be stored in a more secure way. So if a candidate gives a solution as user defaults there, then the interviewer would probably think that, okay, they're not aware of a solution that exists which also helps encryption. So the candidate, so the interviewer might ask, oh, but it's a private data, private data. How wouldn't you want to encrypt it, and then see how the candidate then responds to that. But for a mid to senior level engineer, kind of expected to know Keychain and CloudKit are the only two solutions that will just encrypt out of the box, and to use it in scenarios where encryption and privacy is important, such as authentication. So let's see, do we have one more here? Okay, so which of these approaches will I likely encounter in iOS domains quiz questions? And these iOS domain quiz questions could be either some of the, like the breaking the ice pop quiz questions in your iOS domain specific coding round, or it could be the hiring manager or a tech lead in just a iOS domain quiz round, like the pop quiz ones that we talked about. So in these approaches, most likely you will really just work with. You'll likely encounter the ones that are out of the box, solutions that are commonly used. Keychains for authentication, user defaults for preferences settings, instant variable just in general, but those are purely for like dynamic programming and that type of stuff. Core data, if you're applying to companies like Facebook and Google, they might just graze over asking you like, oh, have you worked with core data? When do you use it? Limitations of it. But if you're applying to Apple in a team, for example, a team like TV, no, not TVs, maybe Notes, Notes team, they use core data for saving your notes on your device, right? So they'll ask you, they might kind of ask you a bit more detailed questions. Again, like 99.99% of the time, no implementation. So if you should probably, I would personally advise you not to spend time on knowing the implementation of these, more of like use case and how to approach these, or like when to use them.